for people to join in. So we are going to launch a poll that you will see pop up on your screen. Just so we know who our demographic is that we're speaking to today. So if you could take a quick minute and respond to the poll, which describes you best? Are you a bird watcher or bird feeding hobbyist, a cat owner wanting to learn more about bird conservation, a WBFI member, or a professional in the industry of bird or backyard feeding? Okay, we see about 80% of you have voted. Give you another couple seconds to submit your poll if you haven't already. Okay. So it looks like we have a lot of WBFI members and professionals in the backyard or bird feeding industry, but we also have some bird watchers and hobbyists. Some of you might be both. We're going to launch one more poll too to see if you are a cat owner. So do you own an indoor cat, outdoor cat, or do you not own a cat? Okay, looks like most of you have voted. I'll give you another 10 seconds to respond if you haven't already. Okay. So it looks like many of you do not own a cat, but I think bird conservation and advocating for keeping cats indoors is very important, whether or not you have a cat of your own. I'm sure at least everyone on here probably knows somebody who owns a cat. All right. So Grant Sizemore is joining us today out of Virginia. He is the Director of Invasive Species Programs at the American Bird Conservatory, where he's worked at for the last 8 years. He has professionally worked in wildlife conservation, conducting original research, facilitating sustainable corporate practices, and advocating for science-based public policies. So we're excited to have him join on. Just a couple housekeeping items before I pass it on to him. Just a reminder that you are able to submit your questions through the Q&A feature on the GoToWebinar control panel. We will be doing Q&A at the end, so please, if you have a question, enter it through there. We'll send out the recording link and PowerPoint presentation for you to view later if necessary. And then if you have any questions during this presentation or after, I will put in the chat where you can contact WBFI for more information. So Grant, without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Let's put this on presenter mode there. Okay. So thanks. I am Grant Sizemore with American Bird Conservancy, and I want to thank you very much for your participation today. I'm going to be talking about one of the huge conservation challenges facing birds today, and that's with regard to domestic cats. So I'm going to lay out what I think are the major facts that you need to know to be an informed participant in ongoing discussions regarding domestic cats and bird conservation. So before I really jump into it, I want to introduce American Bird Conservancy a little bit. I think it's always valuable to know, who it is you're getting your information from. So American Bird Conservancy was founded in 1994. We are dedicated to the conservation of native birds and their habitats throughout the Americas. We really pride ourselves on tackling the biggest challenges for birds. And so American Bird Conservancy protects and stewards critical habitats, including a network of nearly 70 reserves. We engage private landowners to facilitate bird-friendly practices on private lands, and we promote science-based conservation policies. And so one of the key areas of our work is addressing threats such as building collisions, pesticides, and domestic cats. And of course, we're going to be talking about domestic cats today. I want to say that while I'm presenting a variety of conservation challenges associated with domestic cats and birds, this is hardly a personal attack on cats. This cat here is my pet. She's the one I cuddle up with basically every single night. And I want to point out that it's, we can recognize and address the realities of domestic cats while still enjoying their companionship. So if you don't pay attention to anything else I say today, I want to leave you with this, that domestic cats that roam outdoors are a serious danger to birds and other wildlife. And consequently, it is incumbent upon us to properly manage this domestic species. So when talking about domestic cats, a lot of different terms get thrown around. I think they get misused frequently. So let's just kind of set the groundwork for that right up front. Domestic cat is the official name of the species, so all house cats. This is Felis catus. That's the species. So it has no real meaning on whether or not a cat is tame or not. And then subsets of domestic cats are based on their behavior. So there are free-ranging or free-roaming domestic cats, and then there are indoor domestic cats. Within the free-ranging subset, we then have two more breakdowns that are based on temperament of these cats, and that's feral cats and stray cats. So stray cats are generally habituated to people, whereas feral cats are not. So it is a domesticated species, Felis catus. Cats were first domesticated about 10,000 years ago in what's called the Near East, so really the Middle East, the Fertile Crescent region. Their nearest wild relative is Felis sylvestris libica, the Near Eastern wildcat. And since their domestication, they have been transported by people across the globe. So they really now have a worldwide distribution. You can see on this map, this is the distribution of cats on islands, but of course they are found on every single continent on the globe also, except for Antarctica. And the introduction of this species to new environments around the globe has not been without substantial casualties. Domestic cats are instinctive predators that will hunt and kill wildlife regardless of hunger level. Even a well-fed cat will hunt and kill wildlife. So these cats maintain an instinctive prey drive that many owners, myself included, use to interact with their pets. So when indoors with a feather toy, for example, like in this photo on the bottom right, this play behavior is really harmless, and in fact, it's really good enrichment for a pet cat. But that same play behavior, that same instinctive prey drive, when the cat is outdoors, is deadly for wildlife. Now, a 2013 study conducted in partnership between the University of Georgia and National Geographic used collar-mounted video cameras to monitor owned cat behaviors when they roamed outdoors. So again, these are well-fed pets. They have a home, they get fed, they get regular attention and care. But predictably, many of these cats still killed wildlife. What was not predicted in the study, and I think was particularly interesting, was that only 23% of the animals killed by these free-roaming domestic cats were returned to the home. Now, this is important because many previous studies that had attempted to estimate total domestic cat-caused wildlife mortality had relied on prey returns to the home, and thus had likely significantly underestimated the total number of prey killed by free-roaming domestic cats. And it also indicates that owners are incredibly likely to also significantly underestimate the total impact of their free-roaming pet. So the impacts of owned cats, along with unowned cats, by the way, really adds up. National cat predation estimates are a fairly new phenomenon in scientific research for domestic cats, but these studies indicate massive numbers of wild animals killed by free-roaming domestic cats every year. And notice that in many of these countries, you know, the number of different types of wildlife that are killed are in the billions. For birds in the United States, an estimated 2.4 billion birds are killed by free-roaming domestic cats every single year. It is a truly staggering figure. Now, not only are these numbers staggering in and of themselves, they're also similarly shocking when compared to other sources of human-caused bird mortality. Domestic cats are the single greatest source of direct human-caused mortality to birds in the United States and Canada. And you can see the comparison between domestic cats and other sources of bird mortality in this image taken from the State of the Birds report published in 2014. Cats are far and away the #1 source of direct human-caused bird mortality. And these numbers matter. The United States and Canada have experienced a net loss of nearly 3 billion birds over the last 50 years. And 1/3 of all North American bird species are in need of urgent conservation action. Now, obviously, not all of these declines are due to domestic cats, but certainly free-roaming domestic cats play a very large role. Okay, we're going to attempt to show a video here.
Today we published new research showing that pet cats kill 2 to 10 times more wildlife than the equivalent wild predator. Here we're going to show you how we figured this out and what it means for conservation. A few years ago, researchers estimated that cats in North America kill 10 billion birds and mammals each year. Now that's a really terrifying number, but the more we thought about it, the more we kind of wondered, well, so what? We wanted to know, do pet cats and wild predators have the same ecological impact on prey populations?
To compare the impact of pet cats with their wild equivalents, we needed 2 types of data. How much prey does the cat kill? And what's the range over which it hunts?
We wanted to get a global perspective on this, so we teamed with scientists to distribute GPS tracking devices all around the world, making this one of the largest tracking studies ever. In total, we were able to track 925 cats across 6 countries.
The GPS tracks we collected show pet cats are normally hanging around their home and yard and sometimes going into the neighborhood. Younger cats and those living in rural areas had slightly larger home ranges. But on average, pet cats across the world had very small home ranges of 3.6 hectares, usually sticking to within 100 meters of their house.
I'm sorry about that. Where were we?
0.6 prey per
To within 100 meters of their house.
Reports on how much prey cats brought home varied quite a bit.
Okay, sorry guys, we're going to try this one last time. Apparently, I'm not allowed
Today we
to
published
click a single thing on my screen.
Pet cats across the world had very small home ranges of 3.6 hectares, usually sticking to within 100 meters of their house.
Reports on how much prey cats brought home varied quite a bit. Some real active hunters brought home on average 11.6 prey per month, while other more lackadaisical cats were more around 4.25 prey per month.
Of course, we know cats don't bring home everything they kill. Those numbers have an adjustment factor that accounts for prey left behind or consumed.
Next, we need the same information on a wild predator. We found a great study on the jungle cat, which is about the same size as pet cats. That research estimated that they eat 390 mice per month. However, these jungle cats capture these prey items by hunting over a range of 605 hectares, 200 times the size of the hunting territory of the pet cats we tracked.
So we estimate jungle cats kill 0.6 prey per hectare per month, Based on the data we collected on pet cats across the world, we estimate that lazy hunter would kill 1.2 prey animals per hectare per month, while an active hunter would kill 3.2. This means that pets can have an ecological impact on their prey between 2 and 5 times that of a wild predator.
But that's not the end of the story, because pet cats live at twice the maximum density we would expect for any wild predator. And that's going to amplify the ecological impact so that the total impact is 4 to 10 times what we would expect for any wild predator. Our research shows that pet cats can have an extraordinarily large impact on prey populations, but that this is mostly localized near their houses. The easiest thing we can do to counteract this and help protect wildlife is to keep our cats indoors.
If you want to learn more about our study and see some of the GPS tracks from our past participants, check out cattracker.org.
So sorry about that, those technological glitches. But I think the takeaway message there from Dr. Roland Kays and his team at North Carolina State University is that unlike native predatory wildlife, domestic cats have an outsized impact in the environment, driven by their unnatural density, their instinctive predatory drive, and their partnership with humans. So wildlife rehabilitation facilities are particularly or uniquely well suited to observe the impacts that free roaming domestic cats have on local wildlife. And 2 studies were published in 2017 that evaluated just what kind of impact these cats are having. So data from the Wildlife Center of Virginia indicated that domestic cat interactions were the 2nd deadliest cause of bird intake, and that's behind unknown trauma. So they were the deadliest of the identified causes of intake. 81% of domestic cat attacked birds died, and this is including first-rate veterinary attention. Now, the 2nd study included data from a broader review of North American wildlife rehab facilities, and they found similarly that 78% of cat attack victims did not survive. And again, this is only for the animals that were lucky enough to be given treatment by a wildlife rehabilitator. So domestic cat-caused intakes in this study spanned 290 different species of wildlife, truly a huge variety of wildlife that are impacted by at-large domestic cats. Now, if anyone's interested, the Wildlife Center of Virginia, they featured their work in a series called Untamed, which aired on PBS and can be found online. An entire episode was dedicated to domestic cat impacts on wildlife. American Bird Conservancy actually also did a similar review of the impacts that domestic cats have on wildlife intake at wildlife rehabilitation facilities. And you can find that short film, it's like 8 minutes, I think. That short film is available on American Bird Conservancy's YouTube site, as well as our Cats Indoors website. So many of the bird species that are affected by free roaming domestic cats are considered common, right? Or at least those are certainly the ones we see more frequently. But that doesn't mean that the level of predation pressure felt by those species is any less costly for the local population. A study published in 2011 on gray catbirds in the Washington, D.C. metro area found that nearly half, 47%, of all known post-fledging predation events were caused by domestic cats. The researchers there surmised that free-roaming domestic cat predation pressure might exceed recruitment, such that this predation would dramatically impact population persistence. Now, in addition to relatively common species, free-roaming domestic cats have also been documented to kill threatened and endangered species, such as this endangered Hawaiian petrel. And ground nesting birds, such as the Hawaiian petrel, are particularly susceptible to domestic cat predation. But for endangered species, this added pressure of an introduced predator in the environment, like domestic cats, can be the tipping point between species persistence and species extinction. And such has been the case, unfortunately, for dozens of species around the world. Domestic cats have contributed to the extinction of at least 63 species in the wild. In this graph, which is taken from a study published in 2016, note that BMR stands for birds, mammals, and reptiles. The red bars are the number of species extinctions, and the gray bars represent the numbers of threatened and endangered species impacted. 430 species of threatened and endangered birds, mammals, and reptiles are negatively affected by domestic cats. That puts them right up there as a top terrestrial invasive predator, as compared to, in this study, rats, dogs, pigs, etc. The most famous example, I think, of a domestic cat-caused species extinction belongs to the Stevens Island wren, which is pictured here on the bottom right. This species was unknown to science when a lighthouse keeper moved to the island with his cat. It may have been a couple of cats, it's a little vague, but regardless, this lighthouse keeper came and brought at least one domestic cat. And the species was only, quote unquote, discovered when the cat actually returned to the lighthouse to his owner and brought the bird back in its jaws. But sadly, within just a few years after this species was identified by science, they had been wiped out from existence. And it's all due to predation pressure by domestic cats. Now, as a result of the predatory impacts of free-roaming domestic cats, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, the IUCN, lists domestic cats among the world's most harmful invasive species. Now, new research has indicated, unfortunately, that even when an at-large domestic cat does not directly kill wildlife, its mere presence in the environment can be enough to cause harm to local wildlife. So in this study published in 2013, researchers in the United Kingdom monitored common blackbird nests to understand the implications of fear, the ecology of fear. And the researchers placed a model of a domestic cat near a blackbird nest for 15 minutes. Then they removed the model and observed the bird's subsequent behavior. The results were that adult birds reduced the amount of food fed to young in the nest by 1/3. And the nest suffered an increased predation rate by an order of magnitude. The researchers concluded in this case that the defensive behaviors elicited by the cat model reduced the amount of time that adult birds dedicated to feeding young, because they felt obligated, to defend against an identified feline predator in the area. And that this defensive behavior, which might have been successful against a cat, actually served to identify the nest for other predators. So, even when a cat does not directly attack these birds, they may still indirectly harm them simply through their presence in the environment. So let's review real quickly. I'm throwing a lot of science and stats at you. I think the takeaway message here is that domestic cats are introduced. They're a non-native species in North America, domesticated by people. And their introduction to North American environments around the world has led to significant impacts for birds and other wildlife. So we've talked thus far about the direct and indirect role that domestic cats play as predators in the environment. But now let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the role that these cats play in the transmission of parasites and diseases. So this table on the screen is from a 2015 study reviewing pathogens transmitted by domestic cats. And you can see that there are quite a few of them, right? Notice things like plague, typhus, cat scratch fever, which, yes, is a thing. It's not just from a song. I'm not going to talk about all of these pathogens, but I do want to highlight two of these moving forward, and that's rabies and toxoplasmosis. So most of us, I think, are somewhat familiar with rabies, right? Maybe we saw Old Yeller as a kid. rabies is caused by a virus, and once symptoms appear, it's nearly 100% fatal. Rabies is really no joke. You know, nearly 60,000 people die of rabies infection around the world every single year. This map shows some of the main reservoir species for rabies virus variants in the United States. But of course, the virus can infect a wide range of species. And it turns out, of course, that domestic cats as a mammal are one of those species. You can see here the distribution of confirmed rabid domestic cats across the United States. And this is data from 2014. There is an especially high concentration of rabid domestic cats in the eastern United States, which is where rabies itself is really more prevalent in the country. So because many cats spend time roaming outdoors and interacting with wildlife, they're at an increased risk of rabies exposure as compared to other domestic animals. You know, domestic cats have consistently been the top rabid domestic animal in the United States for decades now. And you can see the number of rabid domestic cats here broken out by state in this graph. They're, you know, these are the blue bars, by the way, the number of rabid domestic animals in each state. And again, this is data from 2014. The orange bars represent the proportion that rabid domestic cats are relative to all rabid domestic animals in the state. And I think what's striking here is the number of states where domestic cats make up at least 50% of all rabid domestic animals. Even more striking, I think, is the number of states where rabid domestic animals account for 100% of all rabid domestic animals in the state. So, and because of the indoor-outdoor nature of many domestic cats and the increased likelihood that a person will interact with an unknown domestic cat, say, as compared to wildlife, people aren't bending over to try and pet an unknown skunk or raccoon, but an unknown cat they might try and interact with. This behavior results in the fact that domestic cats are disproportionately more likely to expose people to the disease than wildlife. Now, you could also say that, well, just mind your own business and you won't be infected. Don't bend over and try and pet an unknown domestic cat, and there's no rabies risk. But that's not always the case, and I want to share a news clip from a few years ago that illustrates this.
Public health officials are looking for people who may have come into contact with a rabid cat.
They're worried for your safety. The cat roamed the streets for more than a week, and if you were bitten, it could be deadly. Besides, the animal like shows that's why time is up yet.
Yeah, Anita and Tom, the health department says this cat was likely rabid from April 10th through April 19th. That means the clock for treatment is ticking because you must be treated within 30 days. Now the health department is aggressively trying to find anyone who may have come into contact with this cat. Pink flyers lining the streets and storefronts in the Compostela Crossing section of Chesapeake carry a serious warning. A rabid cat attacked several people who are now at risk.
The cat was not acting normally. It was attacking people. It was jumping at the window and had a broken leg and was not nursing the broken leg that much.
It jumped right here and been right here on the side.
Charles Mason says the black and white cat attacked a customer last Monday as he tried to leave Mason's convenience store. His surveillance cameras caught it on video.
It came to the door. As soon as the customer opened the door, it jumped on him, and it either bit him or scratched him because he knocked him off, knocked him down.
That man got treatment, but health officials say the cat roamed near the Family Dollar on Compostela for days, scratching and jumping on several people. Now the health department is trying to find them.
These people are not coming forward because I think that they think the same thing you think, that, oh, once symptoms start, I'll just go to the doctor. Not with this.
If not treated in 30 days, rabies is fatal. And once symptoms start, Engel says it's too late. Now they're going door to door, visiting soup kitchens, even using this electronic sign, hoping to help people before it's too late.
Call us and we will work out transportation. We'll work out whatever we have to do to get them in there for the series of 4. We will work with them. We need them to come in so we don't lose them.
Chesapeake health officials are looking for people who may have.
So in that news clip, the cat was clearly acting aggressively, but I think it's worth noting that this really isn't always the case with a rabid domestic cat. There are examples of stray cats, stray kittens actually exposing huge numbers of people to this disease. And I also want to point out that the series of 4 that she was referring to in that clip is the post-exposure prophylaxis vaccine, a series of 4 shots that you would get following exposure to rabies. And I said that domestic cats disproportionately expose people or are a risk for exposure to people as compared to wildlife. They also account for an estimated 16% of all post-exposure prophylaxis administration, even though cats do not make up 16% of all known rabid animals in this country. So many of you are, with regard to rabies, are probably also thinking, well, just get your cat immunized for rabies. And if you were thinking that, you're exactly right. It's incredibly important to vaccinate a domestic cat, but it's also important to then provide the necessary booster vaccinations. A single vaccine does not infer lifetime rabies immunity. Booster vaccinations are critical. This is the guidance of the National Association of State Public Health Veterinarians. This is the same group that also calls for the removal of stray animals. You can see this listed on your screen in front of you. Whether it's dogs, cats, ferrets, all of these animals should be removed from the environment to help control rabies. Okay, let's move on from rabies to toxoplasmosis. So this is a disease that is caused by infection with the parasite Toxoplasma gondii. Unlike with rabies, where domestic cats are merely a carrier of the virus, felines are actually the definitive host of Toxoplasma gondii, which means that felines are necessary for the parasite to complete its life cycle. Toxoplasma gondii can only sexually reproduce in the gut of a feline. So the life cycle of the parasite, really briefly here, is that it's excreted in cat feces, and then it can infect a wide variety of intermediate hosts, any bird or mammal. The parasite then gets into this new host tissues because it's been ingested or inhaled. It gets into these tissues, it replicates, and then can be passed along to another intermediate host or to a definitive host, a cat, through the consumption of that individual's infected tissues. Whereas many species can become infected, felines really are the only animals that excrete the parasite into the environment. Again, that's through feces. One of the really interesting things about Toxoplasma gondii is how it facilitates its own transmission. It turns out that this parasite can manipulate its host to increase the likelihood of it making its way from an intermediate host back into a definitive host, feline. So this study from 2000 found that rodents infected with Toxoplasma gondii were significantly more likely to spend time in areas where domestic cats were found as opposed to uninfected rodents. So the researchers concluded that, quote, manipulation by Toxoplasma gondii appears to alter subtly the cognitive perception of the host in the face of predation risk, end quote. So by modifying the host's risk perceptions, an otherwise wary rodent, in this case, became an easier target for predation, thus increasing the chance that the parasite can complete its life cycle by moving from the intermediate host, the rodent, back to the definitive host, a cat, where it can then start its life cycle all over by sexually reproducing in the cat gut. I think it's really fascinating, and it's an example of a zombie parasite, more or less. The consequences of this infection, however, for an intermediate host, whether that be a bird or a mammal, can be significant. And this is regardless of whether or not the host is infected through environmental contamination or through the consumption of infected tissues. So I want to point out that in addition to these two pathways, the parasite can also be transmitted from mother to fetus. So in people, the consequences of infection include miscarriage, blindness, deafness, organ failure, up to and including death. This parasite is the reason that pregnant women are advised not to change cat litter while pregnant. Generally, that's how most people have ever even heard of toxoplasmosis. They get pregnant and the doctor says, don't change cat litter while pregnant. Well, it's because of infection risks with Toxoplasma gondii. But for domestic cats that are roaming outdoors, the entire landscape is one giant litter box. And this microscopic cat excreted oocyst remains infectious for months to years in the environment. And a single cat can excrete up to hundreds of millions of these infectious oocysts, essentially contaminating a huge swath of the environment. Now, I want to point out you can see there's an asterisk next to schizophrenia. This is because although certain neurodegenerative diseases like schizophrenia have been linked to toxoplasmosis, it's not yet clear whether toxoplasmosis actually causes these diseases. But there is a correlation with infection risk and disease prevalence. Now, I don't want to say a whole lot about domestic animals and Toxoplasma gondii, but they are subject to infection, and the consequences can be similar in domestic animals like livestock as they are experienced by people. So I think the takeaway message here is I would not recommend that cat feces be in areas where your livestock spend time. Not only are infections potentially harmful to the livestock themselves, of course, but it could also then be passed on to people through the consumption of contaminated meat products. And in fact, toxoplasmosis is the second leading cause of death among foodborne illnesses in the United States. Wildlife, of course, are also at risk of infection. I think it's important, I should say that, wild felines here can also excrete the Toxoplasma oocysts into the environment. It's not just domestic cats. So bobcats, mountain lions, for example, can also excrete the parasite. But in terms of total environmental contamination, there are far more domestic cats roaming the landscape than there are wild felids. And so not only do we see infections in species that inhabit the same sort of habitat as cats, as felines, but infections also turn up in species downstream. Southern sea otters off the coast of California, Hawaiian monk seals, they've been identified as infected due to terrestrial runoff of these cat-excreted oocysts contaminating the environment. And in addition to carnivores or omnivores that might be exposed through consumption of infected meat, herbivores like white-tailed deer or Hawaiian geese are also infected. And these infections have been linked to concentrations of domestic cats in the environment. So in review, I want to just note that domestic cats are capable of transmitting a variety of pathogens into the environment, including rabies and toxoplasmosis. And to effectively manage the rabies risks, they require an initial vaccine and regular booster vaccines. And free-roaming domestic cats are also a major risk for the transmission of Toxoplasma. So I guess the question at this point really is, what do we do about all this, right? And hopefully the obvious choice for for pet cats is responsible pet ownership, including keeping domestic cats under their owner's control, as many of you identified that you already do. So don't let pet cats roam the landscape. This is recommended not just for bird conservation or public health, by the way, but it's also for the safety of the cat. The American Veterinary Medical Association recommends that pet cats be kept under their owner's control, identified, like with a license or microchip, and sterilized. Catios and leashes are really great options here if you want to provide your pet cat with some safe outdoor time. And if you're interested in more solutions for pet cats, you can find some of those on American Bird Conservancy's website, which is listed here on the screen. Ultimately, I think the management of domestic cats, both for their care and control, boils down to treating cats like we treat dogs. It's not revolutionary stuff. Not only is keeping pet cats under an owner's control, great for that pet cat, but we also need to be proactively removing stray and feral domestic cats from the environment. Let's give them a chance at a loving forever home, whether that be through adoption, placement in an animal shelter, or in a long-term facility like this cat sanctuary in Hawaii. Under no circumstances should we, however, abdicate responsibility for these animals by subjecting them to a life of abandonment, which puts cats, birds, and other wildlife and people at risk. So if you have issues in your yard, okay, let's make sure you can see this properly. There we go. Hopefully you can see that. If you have issues with domestic cats trespassing into your yard and you're worried about birds at your feeders, there are a few things that I think you should consider. One is adequate fencing that prevents cats from entering your property or prevents them from getting close to the bird feeders. This image on the left is from a company called Ocelot. It has these roll bars on the tops of fences that prevent the cat from really getting a grip and being able to then get over the fence and get into your yard, as it were. Or you can use fencing just around your bird feeder, like this fence in the top right. Second, I think keep areas around bird feeders clear of any hiding places for cats. These feeders on the bottom right are both close to the ground and surrounded by a ton of hiding places where a predator might lie in wait. Thirdly, consider trapping trespassing cats. But before you do that, look into local and state laws in your area to see what is permissible in your region. And then finally, if all else fails, I strongly recommend stop feeding birds. It's a sad outcome, I know, but it's better than creating a death trap for the birds that might visit your yard. If you're interested in learning more about responsible pet ownership solutions and managing stray and feral cats on the landscape, you can check out American Bird Conservancy's website. Consider joining this growing movement of people working together across the US to support bird-friendly ordinances, like this one, our Model Companion Animal Ordinance, which again boils down essentially to treating cats like we treat dogs. Things like microchips, keeping a cat under an owner's control. It's not rocket science, it works. And so finally, in the last review that we'll do here, I think the key takeaway points today are that free roaming domestic cats are they're a domesticated species, but also an introduced predator, and they've been introduced into environments around the world, causing significant harm to birds and other wildlife. They also have the potential, when roaming the landscape, to spread a variety of parasites and diseases, and we need to take steps to mitigate those risks. And the solution to all of this is keep cats indoors or keep them safely contained under an owner's control and safely off the landscape. Let's be proactive about removing stray and feral animals from the landscape. Let's treat cats more like we treat dogs. So with that, I want to say thank you very much for your attention. My name is Grant Sizemore. I'm the Director of Invasive Species Programs at American Bird Conservancy. Please feel free to visit our website at abcbirds.org, and I will be happy to stick around and answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grant. That was a wonderful presentation. If anybody has questions, please feel free to enter them into the chat now. And we have a little time, about 15 minutes here, to kind of go through those. Grant, one initial question I have, beyond bird conservation, you made a really, really strong case for keeping cats indoors. And through the polling, it sounds like some people on here are maybe cat owners, but like I said, I'm sure everybody knows a cat owner somewhere. How do you have that conversation with people that maybe keep their cats outdoors? How do you kind of encourage them by sharing resources, or what methods do you use to kind of encourage friends and family to be advocates for this as well?
Yeah, well, it can be a tricky situation, or a tricky conversation. I won't lie about that. But I think the important thing is to find the benefits that are influential for that particular person. So the most obvious thing, I think, would be the benefits to the cat itself by keeping it indoors or otherwise safely contained. Cats live longer, healthier lives. They're not at risk from being attacked by a dog or eaten by a coyote or ingesting poison or whatever the case may be. By keeping it under an owner's control, it's a lot safer. And that is what's recommended by the American Veterinary Medical Association. So I would recommend starting there. And then you can also comment, of course, if they're a wildlife enthusiast, the impacts that cats have on birds and other wildlife, or the public health concerns that exist with free-roaming domestic cats as well. And we have a number of resources on our website that can help have that conversation, help you have that conversation, like some brochures that go through, it's called Cats, Birds, and You, is probably our most popular brochure in that regard, that talk about the many reasons why it's beneficial for cats, birds, and people to keep cats safely contained.
Wonderful. Yeah, Bruce Glick, it looks like he entered a question comment, really interested how to appeal to cat owners on an emotional level to keep their cats indoors. And I think exactly like you were saying, Grant, it is really that being able to share how it's better for the cat as well. One thing that comes to my mind too is the collars with the jingle bells, and how that might seem like a good idea for them to deter the birds, but also how that puts them at risk for predators.
Yeah, we have some science available on our website also that breaks down some of the anti-predation devices. There have been studies on a handful of those. And so although they can help reduce predation on wildlife, they do not eliminate it. And of course, the best thing you can do is keep cats safely contained. And maybe this is a process. You don't bring the cat in all at once, but you start to do it little by little. Winter, of course, is a great time to do it because cats tend to be a little less active anyway. And of course, starting when they're young is the best way to do it.
Great. It looks like we have some other questions coming in. Thank you. Bruce, you said brochures on the American Bird Conservancy site. So the abcbirds.org/cats is a good link to send. Okay.
Yep.
Perfect. So I just put that in the chat for everyone. Randall Putz asked, the chart that showed the impact of invasive species, I think rodents were second after cats. Is there research on the impacts of cats on rodents? And are cats still a net negative impact after considering their impact on rodents?
Yes, they are still a net negative impact. So it depends on what we're talking about with rodents. So like, one of the movements among certain members of the public these days is to try and sell domestic cats in the environment as a form of urban rat control. And that is just not a successful use of the predatory behavior of domestic cats. The science indicates that they just do not control urban rat populations. There have been a couple studies on that. But they do kill, mice and things. But what some of the studies show is that, especially on islands where, say, nesting seabirds will arrive only seasonally, what will happen is domestic cats will take advantage of other introduced prey items, whether it's rodents or rabbits or whatever, and they'll survive. They'll just barely survive on them for 9 months out of the year, and then when the seabirds arrive, they just decimate them. So the best choice here, of course, is to remove these domestic cats from the landscape, but there's no reason you can't also try and remove the rats or other invasive predators as well. Let's try and take care of all this at once.
Great, and this is a question somewhat related to cats, birds, from Nastia. Okay, I have a question about hawks and owls. After I started feeding birds and installed a feeder, I noticed hawks and owls started coming catching birds from the feeder. Obviously, this is normal behavior for predator birds, but how do you still keep feeding birds with predators like that? And I mean, I know exactly like we were saying, those hawks and owls would also be, predatory towards cats and domestic cats as well that are outdoors. But do you have recommendations for that? Or there might be some other WBFI members that could maybe chime in as well that are on the call.
Yeah, so I'll say that's a little outside my area of expertise, but I would recommend, if you're concerned about, creating a smorgasbord for predatory birds, just stop feeding birds for a little while, and those predators are likely to move on, those hawks or owls. But again, those are native wildlife as well. So I'm in terms of an impact to native bird populations, we're less concerned about hawks and owls killing songbirds, for example, than we are about the huge numbers of domestic cats, which are an introduced species, taking our native wildlife.
Great. Bruce asked, what about education around feral cats? Lots of people feed them out without regards to native wildlife. In fact, many see these as predation as a natural cycle. So yeah, could you maybe touch base on kind of feral cats? And I think exactly like you're saying previously about how we should be treating cats more like dogs. Do you want to touch base on that?
Sure. Yeah, well, you're exactly right. I mean, we don't allow for feral dogs to remain on the landscape. We don't feed feral dogs and call it a sustained feral dog colony, but some people do that with feral cats. So whether or not you feed them, the evidence is clear that feral or cat inside the house, they will still kill wildlife. So they still have impacts on wildlife. And as the science also shows, that even if they're not directly killing wildlife, or when, because we know they do, when they're not directly killing wildlife, there are still indirect impacts that we saw from the reduced amount of feeding to the young and increased nest predation, for example. So for feral cats, don't feed them is part of the solution. Instead, be proactive with your local government, local animal control about removing those animals from the landscape. Let's give them a chance. Not all of these animals that are called feral domestic cats are truly feral. Many of them are stray cats that have been abandoned by their owner or have become lost, or have, for whatever reason, they are somewhat tame to people and could actually be adopted and placed in a home. But it's a major problem that we're seeing throughout the country, and feral domestic cats or unowned domestic cats have a much higher impact on wildlife than even pet cats.
So we have a question from Spain, which is exciting. So over in Europe, we have a problem each time more cities allow groups of citizens to manage cat colonies in parks, etc. They even give money for them to feed them, sterilize them, but then free them again. Do we have the same problem here in the US? And if the answer is yes, how do we manage it?
Yes, we definitely do. It's a major problem throughout this country. So that's called trap, neuter, release, or trap, neuter, return, or trap, neuter, reabandon. And so from our perspective, the trapping and the neutering, or the spaying, so the sterilization of that cat is excellent. We support that 100%. But it's that re-release of the cat into the environment which is problematic. If we could simply hold on to these cats and give them a life in an animal shelter, give them a life in a cat sanctuary, release them into an enclosed space. Let's say somebody wants to do trap, neuter, release, TNR. Let them take care of that, that colony of cats in an enclosed, confined area on their own property, by the way. That would really be an excellent solution. But what you need to do is work with local governments to try and enforce or get passed legislation that would prohibit that type of activity. It's harmful for wildlife. It's a disaster for public health. It's I think a real nuisance. The trespassing of these cats then onto their neighbor's property. It creates a real problem. And to work proactively requires working with local governments and being a vocal spokesperson for why these feral cats really do not belong in the landscape.
Wonderful. Kind of related to that question, Tim Mack asked, how do we change the culture? Should there be some type of law? And I think you mentioned kind of working with local law to kind of put that in place. Do you have any resources for kind of those grassroots efforts or things that you would recommend kind of taking that first step?
We do. So we have that companion animal model ordinance. That is a great first step for identifying what should be in your local laws or regulations, and if it's not there, then it's provides a template for introducing it to your local ordinances. We do have some other resources on our website, like model letter to the editor, where you can then distribute something in your local newspaper and let people know about the problem that exists. And we're also happy to work with you. If you're interested in this, give me a call, send me an email, gsizemore@abcbirds.org. I'm happy to provide, as much support as we possibly can. But this is certainly a problem throughout the country. And it's, like you said, it's an emotional problem, and the emotional part is certainly more challenging to overcome. But we have the science, we have the evidence behind us. It's just a matter of getting people to actually listen to the science and make decisions that are based not just on this emotional knee-jerk reaction of what's perceived to be in the cat's best interest, but whether that is or is not, and I would say it is not in the cat's best interest, but regardless, it's certainly not in the best interest of wildlife conservation and of public health.
Great. So we're coming up on top of the hour. One question I have for you, do you walk your cat, and how did you train to do that?
Yeah, I do, not frequently. How about that? We have gone on leashed walks together. So my cat has been indoors her entire life. She was really small when she was adopted. She was a little feral kitten that we adopted. And so since that time, since she was like 7 days old, she's basically been inside her entire life, except for we do let her out on a leash sometimes, and we have a little tent that folds up. And so we'll sometimes put that outside and let her go in the tent and just sort of lie outside in the sunshine, or she'll go out on the patio with us and sit there and take in the fresh air. So there are options, alternatives for giving your cat some fun outdoor refreshing time, but to do so in a safe and responsible way that keeps your cat safe, that keeps wildlife safe, and which is responsible for your neighbors as well. Catios, I think, are one of the solutions that are really taking off, because they provide that opportunity to give your cat a dedicated space, a dedicated outdoor space where they can come and go as they want. You don't have to pay attention to them like you would on a leash, for example. And they're going to be safe. Wildlife's going to be safe. It's a great solution. I'd encourage everyone, if they have the space in their own home and are willing to install something. It doesn't have to be, like super palatial or fancy. Just some walls and chicken wire would do. But it's a great alternative for giving a cat some safe outdoor time.
I love the word catio as well. I think that's a
Yeah.
really good pun. I actually also saw a friend that has taught his cat how to hike. He's a rock climber and takes his cat out hiking with him. So
Yeah, that's really cool. Adventure Cats is a program that really acknowledges the benefits of cats hiking on leashes. They can definitely do it. It just takes a little patience and dedication to build up that practice.
absolutely. Well, Grant, I think, everybody's probably going to be clicking off here soon. Thank you so much for this presentation. I definitely learned a lot myself. I know other attendees probably as well. I will send a follow-up email to or anybody that has additional questions or interested in kind of starting that advocacy initiative to keep cats indoors and protect the domestic cats, but also backyard wildlife as well. So Grant, thank you so much again. We look forward to having you for future webinars.
That'd be great. Thank you very much.
Thanks everyone for your time.